On this week's episode of the Going Commando podcast, we break down the Commanders' heartbreaking loss to the Minnesota Vikings, get fans ready for Monday Night Football in Philly against the Eagles, and we're halfway through the season, so we give our halfway point MVP, offensive and defensive players of the year. So stick around, stay tuned, and let's get the show started. Welcome to Going Commando, a Washington Commanders podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Going Commando podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Tom. I'm here with Chris and Clark. And boys, let's just get into it. How do you feel after this game, coming off of a loss to the Vikings, nail biter? I'm sure you boys have a lot of opinions on this one.
Yeah, I'm overall, I'm definitely disappointed that we weren't able to come away with the win, but I'm overall pleased with this game on a couple different levels. I think it proved we are a team that can hang in there and play good football against good teams, but I think it also was a game that really would highlighted our weaknesses and showed that how basically, for us to win, we really can't make any mistakes if we want to stay competitive with kind of who we are as a team and what we can and can't do. We were gifted a number of things in this game, and we still weren't able to take advantage of them. We were gifted some penalties. We did have a key turnover with the St. Juice, potential pick six called back, but we played a good team, and we show that we can stay with it. It's just a matter of executing the whole way through.
You talk about, things being gifted to us. How about the things that we gifted to the Vikings in this one? Obviously, the late interception to Harrison Smith was quite the gift for the Minnesota Vikings. And of course, the John Ridgeway penalty down at the goal line, giving them a new set of downs, really is what ended up losing us the game. And they were able to knock off all that time off the clock. So it was definitely a close game. It's a game that I'm disappointed we didn't win. Minnesota's a good team, but they, like I said last week, they played a lot of close games. A lot of us, Chris and I at least, thought that this game was going to be one that we could win. It ended up being a game that came down to the wire, and it's unfortunate that a few things don't bounce our way and we end up losing in Kirk Cousins' revenge game back in Washington.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important when you bring up John Ridgeway because I think a lot of fans, especially myself, would say John Ridgeway cost us the game. I mean, obviously, they don't take that time off the clock. We at least have a chance to drive down the field if we're not, scoring a touchdown, at least kicking a field goal and keeping it a tied game. Honestly, what I think we should be talking about here is just how the offense has kind of found its footing. I mean, we were talking earlier in the season about Brian Robinson and how his role would be when he comes back from his shooting injury. And obviously he's come back and he's become this kind of bell cow guy where he's taking the majority of the carries. But Antonio Gibson is still getting looks, which is I think something we can all agree is good. Um, Still catching balls. I mean, Terry is looking amazing. Curtis Samuel is still kind of feeding off of that early season hype that I think a lot of us were prone to giving him after that first week win. The offense has really come down to or not come down to earth, but really more shot for the stars and develop. So I think the defense here has got to be our biggest question. What do you boys think?
Well, before we talk about the defense, here's the thing about you mentioned all these weapons we have on offense and all these playmakers and they're all guys that we should be relying on most when we're in critical game situations. And I think it goes back to a continued theme throughout this season of just that I've been harping on is the coaching extremely just poor coaching, I think, towards the end of this game by both Rivera and Scott Turner. I think that those last couple of drives there after, felt that momentum start to shift. We didn't see, why are we not going to Terry McLaurin in situations like that? Why are we not going to Curtis Samuel? Why are we not getting creative with some of our best playmakers? We're trying stupid things on the outside. We're doing very vanilla, just runs, up the middle. Or it was just very frustrating to see that. And then Rivera, completely fumbling the bag with the timing at the end of the game. Yes, we couldn't foresee obviously the John Ridgway penalty, but uh, why save that timeout until after the 2-minute warning? It just doesn't make sense. You call that timeout, the defense, I believe it was like third down, that they're now those guys have to make a decision whether or not they want to like take a shot at potentially scoring the touchdown here, and then maybe not getting it, and then the clock stops and it's even better for us, and then having the 2-minute warning still right there. Or do they have to make the decision? Okay, we're going to run it out and just kick the field goal now. I just didn't understand the logic of Rivera holding on to that, letting more clock, run down, and in the post game, all he said when asked about that is, "Oh yeah, my analytics guy. I talked my analytics guy. The analytics said to do that," when he was asked about that in post game. So I think that's a bullshit answer. Quite frankly, I don't think it made any sense. So yeah, again, just frustrated with the coaching. And I think that's what ultimately cost us the game. Obviously, that the late, Heineke interception was not pretty, but I think that there was a lot that also went wrong in addition to that.
Well, when you bring up Heineke, I mean, Heineke, as you know, I'm not a fan, and I think this game was certainly one that you can point to as being one that maybe if we had certainly if we had a better quarterback, maybe not necessarily Carson Wentz, but just a better quarterback in general, I think we pull this win out, and I think our stats look a little bit better. Um, but Heineke isn't to blame here, and it's important that I think that we touch on Heineke really quickly because he is a guy that, I said earlier in the year, he's a guy that when he's our starting quarterback, he's at the bottom of the 32 in terms of QB rankings for starters. And he's actually up to 25 now from what I last saw. So um, I think it's important that we recognize that Heineke is playing well, especially given the circumstances. But he's certainly not fixing anything for us.
That's the thing, like he plays well at times, and then there's other times where it's, oh, here's a really bad interception and a really bad time. If you remember last week against the Colts, he also threw a late interception, although we were still able to come away with the win thanks to his late game heroics. And I'm sure a lot of fans were, waiting or hoping that that would be the same case in this game, given that we, we're potentially going to get the ball back there at the end of the game. But it's really interesting with Taylor Heineke. Obviously, everybody loves the guy, but it almost seems as if he can do no wrong. It's now 2 weeks in a row where he either cost us the game or almost cost us the game. And you still have fans cheering for Heineke, chanting Heineke, Heineke in the stands. No matter what the guy does, he's just in the good graces of the fan base.
I totally agree, Clark, and I think that's just because he's likable. He's come in and done exciting things for us when really no one else has. And I think the fan base appreciates that, but also understands who he is and what his probably ultimate role on this team is. He had a very if you guys remember, he had a filthy spin move on a designed run, a QB run at one point in the game that was just really good.
True.
Completely, I was like, wow, that was like the best Heineke, spin like juke move I've ever seen. So like he'll give you something like that where you're like, wow, this guy can play ball. Like he's with the best of them, and then he'll go out and just throw like just completely miss on an open Logan Thomas and just basically sail the ball directly into Harrison Smith's hands. Harrison Smith didn't even do, anything, remarkable on that play. He just was, he was just there ready to catch the ball that Heineke threw to him. So I totally agree on the kind of back and forth Jekyll and Hyde that we seem to get with Heineke.
But you have to ask yourself now, like, yes, is the fan base behind this guy? Of course. But is he giving us the best chance to win on Sundays? I think especially depending on what happens next week. Because I mean, that is obviously a humongous game against Philly on Monday night. Um, but I mean, is that a decision that they're going to have to make when Carson is healthy again? Obviously, he's the starter, but is it going to be a decision, or do you guys think that Carson is just going to come back in and be the starter?
Well, obviously, when Carson comes back, there will have to be a discussion about it. I mean, Taylor Heineke himself even said when you're paying a guy $30 million and you're paying another one $2 million, you got to start the $30 million guy. I'd be curious to see what his response would be now to that exact same question, given that he's had, I think we can all agree, a slightly better run than Heineke or than Wentz, pardon me. You're right, Clark. These next few games are important. I mean, we're looking at a 5 game stretch that could determine whether or not we even still have a shot at playoffs, much less doing anything significant in playoffs. Now, when you look at this team, do you think that this is a playoff team? I don't think so. And does that help Taylor Heineke? Yes, because I think it gives you the opportunity to say, well, look, we're not fighting for anything, and we don't necessarily want you to get hurt or lose your value or X, Y, and Z to Wentz. Now, the Eagles, it's important that you bring that up, Clark, and I think that it's important that we move on to the Eagles game because the Vikings game really wasn't. I don't feel like it was a representation of what this team is accurately. Now the Eagles, I think our defense is really what's going to win us this game, and I think that Wentz and Rivera both realize that Carson Wentz or Taylor Heineke, whoever's the quarterback, isn't deciding those games for us. It's whether our defense allows 23 or 21 points like they did against the Packers, or 20 points against the Vikings, or whether we hold them to below 20, which seems to be where most of our wins occur.
I actually do think that this Vikings game was representative of the team we are. You said that it's not. I really think that this team is built and predicated on a good defense kind of leading the way. That's what led the success in 2020. Obviously, didn't really go that way last year, but I mean the defense has been playing really well the last few weeks, and it's really been kind of the offense needing to catch up and at least just seem to score enough points just to kind of scrape by. And I think that this game against the Vikings was exactly that. The defense was keeping us in the game the entire time. Offense had a drive or two, and obviously that one touchdown was kind of interesting because the Vikings defender ends up running into the referee, which kind of takes a guy out of the play, and Curtis Samuel kind of just rolls into the end zone. So kind of a freak play there and an unorthodox way to score. And that's not going to be obviously a consistent way to get it done week in, week out. So I actually do think that this last game has kind of been the norm of how we've been and what the team is looking like. And it's not what we should be looking like, especially going up against a high-powered offense like Philly. We're really going to need to focus on the offensive side of the ball to come out with a win there.
I agree, Clark. I think the consistency you mentioned, for especially on the offensive side, is something that we obviously struggle with. I mean, you have moments where we look all right, and players make plays. You have Dax Milne, getting a touchdown. I mean, Tom, I'm sure you want to highlight that at some point, but Armani Rogers, got involved at one point and had the run. So like Scott Turner, he draws up good plays every once in a while, but he doesn't draw them up when it matters most. And that's the problem I have. And again, it goes back to coaching there, but totally agree when it comes to the defense carrying us through this game. The D line was getting pressure yet again for another consecutive week on Kirk Cousins. Came up, just short a couple of times, but I thought the pressure that we were getting was very well, even with Cole Holcomb out. So we had good old John Bostic in there. And I thought St. Juice was playing very well. I mean, I think he's been outstanding for the most part. I know he got that PI call on the play called on him rather to prevent the run back. But if you remember, it was St. Juice coverage by St. Juice that caused the tipped interception by Danny Johnson. Early in the game. So I think him combined with some collective, decent play in the back end every once in a while, combined with the solid, front front four, you know, D line work there. I mean, I agree. I think that if we want to have a chance against Philly, we're gonna have to heavily rely on the defense, heavily rely on our D line getting to Jalen Hurts, and hoping that our secondary can continue to kind of hold it together back there.
Yeah, and this was a game that, early in the year, I think we all had as a win, if I'm not mistaken, against the Eagles. We lost 24-8 last time. Do you boys think that we have a closer game? Do you think it's more of the same? Do you think that we actually end up flipping it on its head and pulling out the win here? I mean, what's your boys feeling going into this week?
Unfortunately, I don't, I don't think we're going to win here. Just, I think that talent wise, we're outmatched and that they're a better coached team and with more talent on both sides of the ball, particularly on the offense. So, um, or at least more consistency. I'm not denying that we have some playmakers on our offensive side of the ball. I really think we do. I just don't think they're utilized in the best way that they could be used. So that said, I don't think we're going to win. I think that we might, we have a chance to make this a little bit more of a competitive game if we come out and things are clicking, than maybe some people think. But again, I don't foresee this as a win for us, unfortunately.
The odds are not going to be looking great for us heading into this one. However, as ugly as that game did look in, I believe it was week 3 against Philly, we lost 24-8 in that one. All of their points came in one quarter. So some things were going right defensively throughout the course of that game. And you have to remember that was Carson Wentz under center as well. So is there a chance? Yeah, of course, there's always going to be a chance. Our defense did play well at stretches in that game, of course, shutting them out through 3 of the quarters. So, am I expecting that to happen again? Probably not. But, I feel like you just can't ever count out Heineke. The guy's always going to be able to either lose you a game or make a miraculous play to win you a game. In the case of Philly, if our defense can kind of replicate what happened last time where, yes, they really banged us up in that second quarter, but that was pretty much it. I mean, we're going to be giving ourselves a chance if we can move the ball a little bit. And I think that also is going to come down to our offensive line, maybe picking up and playing a little bit better, because that game against Philly was probably their worst performance all this entire season.
Absolutely. Well, that's obviously a debatable point here and there. And I would argue that the Cowboys 25-10 loss was slightly more embarrassing. At least as a Commanders fan, I know that I have much more disdain for the Cowboys than the Eagles. However, the Eagles fans, when I consider these folks, they live in a very interesting part of my brain. They live in a part of my brain that thinks about NFL fans throwing D-cell batteries at Santa Claus, hitting officials with snowballs, greasing light poles so that the destruction to the city during championship wins isn't too bad. And this
Beating
is
up Chief Z as well. Despicable act.
Never forget,
exactly
never
just
forget.
the despicable acts across the board for the Eagles fan base. Now, does that mean that I think that we are going to have a tighter game? I don't think so. I think that sadly this is a game that once again we do lose. Hopefully we can build on our loss last time and make this a closer game, possibly even flip the switch. However, I'm much more reserved in believing that I think, this certainly has the opportunity to be a one-score game. And I think you look at the teams that we played before, the Eagles, and these were all teams that people were high on before the season. I mean, the Packers were certainly a team that people were high on. The Colts are a team that people were surprisingly high on, even though we kind of were the impetus of their coach getting fired.
I'm really digging your vocabulary right now, Tom. The impetus twice in the span of a couple minutes. I mean, this guy's just a lexicon
Just got out of English class
of
or something.
yeah.
My colorful lexicon, which includes the knowledge and expansive vocabulary that I've accumulated over these years of living, is certainly
Big
important to
brain.
me.
So tell me this,
Thank you.
Tom, if you could use maybe a few words to describe how this season has gone thus far, uh what different vocabulary words would you defer to?
Well, abomination certainly is a word that I think is really important here. We enter this season with not necessarily a hope, but certainly a belief that the grimy, sort of disorganized and disheveled team that we've seen kind of finding its footing again with a new quarterback. And then we see this disappointment, this overwhelming, sort of um, cacophony of issues that come with this team. And it starts to really lower your ambitions as a person who considers himself a fanatic of said team. Now, obviously, we're getting to a point where I think we're just happy to be a part of the games. I'm at this point, I have to be just happy with the appearance of the Commanders on TV, much less than the actual game itself and the people within the organization. But this team halfway through the season really is looking to turn a corner, and I hope they do. However, that Vikings game serves as an addition to the cacophony of mistakes and sort of overall just messiness that this team has brought into my life during this time. What would you boys say about this team up to the halfway mark?
First off, that was beautiful, and it was everything I was hoping it would be. So fans out there, for a quick translation, the season has been a little bit disappointing, but it's not completely disappointment yet. If I'm right in my assumption of your uh of your little statement there. But nonetheless, yeah, we are officially halfway through this season. Um, it's now a 17 game season. We played 9 games, so we're actually technically a little bit over halfway, which is kind of sad to think about. But yeah, I mean, if you said after week 4 or week 5 if we were 4-5, I wouldn't have thought so. I would have thought we'd been a lot worse. So we actually have been able to, string together a few wins here and attempt to salvage this season.
Yeah, I think if I had to choose a word, to describe, how I felt about the season so far, it'd maybe be nostalgia or being nostalgic. Because I feel like this season is very similar and reminiscent of many seasons we've had. Where we get hot for a little bit, think we're actually onto something, and then maybe expectations get a little bit out of whack, and we come right back down to earth. So, I see comparisons to kind of where we were last year at times throughout the season to where we are now. Unfortunately, I see this team. I don't see this team for one, being a playoff contender by any means. I think that's definitely out the window at this point, of course. But I don't see us necessarily winning a ton more games. I would hope to be a little bit more optimistic, and I think I am because I do I do think there's a lot of good things about the team, like I said. But um, I don't know. I think I will be happy if we can have a competitive game against the Eagles. That will be enough in my book to be happy with this team. A win would be preferred, of course, though.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring up this mid-season point, Clark and Chris, because we were talking about this, and I was curious to hear from you guys. There's this whole idea of the mid-season awards and the halfway mark being this sort of defining milestone. So I was curious, looking at this Commanders team, when you think of an MVP, a defensive player of the year, and an offensive player of the year, what are some of the names that you associate with those titles right now? I think obviously, in my personal opinion, I would offer that the MVP of this team so far has been Jonathan Allen. I mean, a guy who we drafted, in the first round. He came with the arthritic shoulders that made him slide down to us, and he's really just proving again to be an all pro and even an all-star level player that we just are happy to have on our team, and I think are really going to be one of the defining players looking back at this era of Commanders football, the beginning of it. I think is going to be a guy that really defines what we are as a team with the future. Now, obviously, that's a lot easier to say with Chase Young gone, but I think Allen really has reached this point where he, is becoming that defensive captain. He was talking to Kerrigan, almost like an equal during the YouTube videos which I was watching about Kerrigan's transition into coaching. So I was curious, what do you boys have in mind when you think of an MVP, an Offensive Player of the Year, and a Defensive Player of the Year?
I actually, I agree with you on Jonathan Allen. I think he's absolutely, if not the MVP, the defensive, player of the year there. So, um, I think you could also argue Terry McLaurin. I mean, not really this last game, but the two games prior. I mean, he came down with just very clutch, momentum changing catches, game sealing catches, that have basically secured both of those wins and really was what kind of led to the momentum and fire that kind of got under this team for a little streak of wins that we had there. So I think you could argue Terry McLaurin. However, I think for the season as a whole, I don't think you could call him MVP because I don't think the numbers are there. I don't know if the numbers are there necessarily in terms of sacks for John Allen, but in terms of, passes tipped, tackles for loss, things of that nature. This whole D line is definitely performing at a very, very high level. I wish I could give a positional group, but I guess I can't. So I'll give MVP to Jonathan Allen. I'm going to give defensive if in that case, maybe even St. Juice, just because I think I've been so pleased with the move from him from inside to the outside and really being a true kind of just boundary corner for us, and I think he's really excelled in that position, and I'm excited to just see how he continues to improve there. And then offensively, um, I'll, that's a tough one because there's been a lot of disappointments. I've been very disappointed with the tight end room this year. Logan Thomas cannot stay healthy, neither can really Cole Turner. So been very lackluster there in a group that we thought was really going to do a lot of things for us. I might even say, I kind of want to say Terry McLaurin, but I might even say Curtis Samuel, just because I've been so impressed with this new Curtis Samuel that haven't been used to in years past. He's been able to do, not only be a threat in the passing game with that clutch catch in triple coverage, albeit with some help maybe from the referee last game, but he's had some really key catches for us, and also some really great runs and kind of misdirection jet sweeps and things of that nature that have really given the offense some momentum and caught some defenses on their heels. So I'm actually going to say Curtis Samuel, and I really hope that I'm saying that again by the end of the season, because I would like to see a lot more usage out of him in this offense.
No, and those are absolutely great points. I think that Curtis Samuel's Swiss Army knife ability has been used to its maybe not to its fullest, but to an extent that we haven't necessarily seen with any player as a Commanders fan. And I think that it's interesting that you bring up St. Juice as a defensive player, because I'll give you my defensive player. My defensive player that I would offer is Cole Holcomb. Now, obviously, if you were asking me at the beginning of the year, I would have said he was a disappointment, and honestly, I believe I intonated as such on this podcast. But Cole Holcomb, when you really get down to the basis of who he is as a player, is that defensive guy whose name is, you talk about the guys whose names you hear, and when you're at the game, especially, you hear the announcers say, tackle made by Benjamin St. Juste to Cam Curl. One of the names you hear most often is Cole Holcomb. And I think he's a guy that has earned the respect of other players and other people around the league outside of the Commanders fan base, and is a guy that really I think we look to as a defensive captain. So that would be who I would offer, although I certainly feel I understand your sentiment with Benjamin St. Juste taking up this role that we didn't expect for him and really performing very well. I think you certainly have a point there to make with him being your defensive player of the year.
I'm going to offer a couple new suggestions. I actually think that the defensive player of the year has been actually Daron Payne and not Jonathan Allen. He has the same amount of tackles as John Allen on the season and one more sack. And I feel like I've seen his name being called a lot in games. He has 5.5 sacks halfway through the season, which I believe would be his best pace ever. I think Payne has really been having himself a great season, and I think it's partially due to him wanting to get a new contract in the offseason. In terms of an offensive player, I think you have to go with Terry McLaurin. The dude has just been the sole reason why we've won a few games, which I don't think anybody else on this team can really say. Will the stats pop out at you? He's not going to be top 5 in receiving yards or anything like that, but he's a baller and we all know it. And he's, turning into a fan favorite and really a great player for this franchise. But MVP, one that you all might not be expecting to hear. Long time. I think he's actually the longest tenured member of the team. Tress Way. Let me offer Tress Way as MVP of this team. Obviously, that's kind of a sad thing to say. Yeah, I mean, sure. The guy gets MVP chance. The fans love him, but you also might not know that he was the NFC Special Teams Player of the Month for the month of October. His 16 punts that were inside the 20 are the second most in the month of October in NFL history since that stat became official in 1979. And it's the most since 2009 in that month. And he's also only the second punter in franchise history, joining Matt Turk to earn that honor. So, he's been a consistent guy for us for a very, very long time. Field position is, very important and sometimes overlooked in the game of football. But when you can pin your opponent deep, and our defense, has been playing well the last few weeks like it has, I think that's also a big part of, success. So not to just completely be like a special teams, punting podcast, which I guess you really can have that conversation about punting all the time if we want to. Just let's show Tress Way some love, NFC offensive or NFC special teams player of the month.
Nah, can't argue with that. Definitely a lot of respect for Tress Way, and with how our offense, typically tends to play, he gets a lot of work. So I'm sure he's happy, to be able to showcase his skills, and we're happy to have him because he's a good player for us. So I can't argue with that.
No, and I think it's really telling when your punter has more punting yards than your quarterback has throwing yards. On this season, according to ESPN, he has 2,401 yards punting, which is more than all of our current quarterback stats combined. Now, obviously, some people would say that's the sign of a bad team, and it's hard to disagree with them. However, I would argue that that is the sign of an interesting team, at least a team that is somewhat not worried necessarily with making the championship and more worried about having fun. And Tressway's a guy, and you said it, Clark. I mean, this is a young team, something that we don't necessarily talk about much. This is a very young team, and Tressway is sort of that, veteran presence, almost similar to, I would compare him to an Adam Vinatieri with the Colts, where he's a guy that's been through so much that he honestly can offer more in terms of advice to the younger players. And I think, it's nice to hear someone really bring up the punter as an MVP because, one, it's good for the brand. For those of you who don't know, For the Brand is a punting and specialist based sort of culture, which was created by Pat McAfee and these other kickers and punters during their time in the league. But Tressway certainly has, sadly for some, but happily for others, been a shining bright spot of this team, and certainly has lived up to the Commander lifestyle, I think, and the Commander way that I think the team is starting to move towards as we move forward.
The Tress Way. I'm sorry, I had to say that.
Yeah, it does. It does definitely show you that Rivera tends to keep his teams pretty young and lean and mean, or at least now that's his philosophy. I mean, Tress Way, I think, is the oldest player we have on roster at this point at age 32, I believe. So that's definitely not the way it used to be here in Washington. We typically were a team that invested more heavily in veteran and brought in veteran presence and brought in, veteran retreads and things of that nature. So, um, hope Trust sticks around though. We wouldn't want to see him go anywhere, of course.
No, I agree. And for the last point I'd like to make, I forgot that I did not give you boys my offensive player. And I think this one might come as a surprise to the people who truly watch the Commanders, although uh to the boys in this podcast right now, I don't think any of us are necessarily surprised that I would say Antonio Gibson is a guy that I would say has been our offensive player of the year. I mean, we talked early on about how this guy was sort of supposed to be our bell cow back, and then we draft Brian Robinson, and there's all these questions. But I would argue that Gibby has really filled an important role this year of being that sort of jackknife guy next to Curtis Samuel, pardon me, the Swiss Army knife guy next to Curtis Samuel. Uh, Now, obviously, you talk about Gibson as a runner. He has the most rushing yards on the team. Now, that's because Brian Robinson was injured, and you see Brian Robinson slowly climbing up that leaderboard. But Antonio Gibson is also our third best receiver on the team. He's caught 2 touchdowns, ran 2 in, which I believe is tied for most on the team with Jahan Dotson in terms of touchdowns. Um, and Jahan Dotson, a guy who I think if he wasn't injured, we would be talking about as an offensive player of the year. But Antonio Gibson really filling this vital role of being that guy that we can throw in the slot, a guy that we can line up next to Taylor or Carson and give the ball, just being that every down kind of back that I think that we all expected him to be coming into the year last year, actually, where he had a little bit of a down year, and he's now sort of building off that and creating his own little zone on this team. So I'd offer that Antonio Gibson is my offensive player of the year.
Yeah, no, Tom, I appreciate you mentioning Gibson because I've really liked what I've seen out of him this year. I mean, I think as a whole, our offense is definitely struggled, and I think we need to do a better job of getting Gibson more opportunities. I love what I've seen of him on offense. I love that we've given him some opportunities in the kickoff return game. You saw in the past game, he actually got one, I believe, almost out to the 50, if not just beyond for us. So I would like to see more of Gibson everywhere on the field. Because quite frankly, I like what I've seen out of Gibson more than what I've seen out of Robinson so far. No, I know Robinson's a new player, did of course get shot, at the beginning of the season or and things of that nature. Not no knock on the young fellow, but I just think Gibson's proving he's a more dynamic player in both the rushing and catching sides of the offensive of the offense here. I just think that he's proven to be just a little bit more dynamic.
Agreed. Gibson has been a dynamic playmaker for us. I think with his emergence and Brian Robinson getting more carries, McKissick has kind of, gone by the wayside a little bit. So maybe is there a way to involve all of them? I don't know. Nonetheless, we're going to need Gibby to pick up some yards and make some plays for us this upcoming Monday.
Absolutely. And that will wrap it up for us here at the Going Commando podcast. I am Tom with my co-host Chris and Clark. And from us to you, HTTR and HTTC.